Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'll give a minute more to those who might be late to join. So we shall begin in a minute. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get into the conversation, I want to start with a simple point. Most organizations today believe their digital experiences are accessible. They have guidelines, they have run audits, they have used tools, and on paper, everything looks compliant. But accessibility isn't defined by whether something passes a test. It's defined by whether someone can actually complete a task. And when those same experiences are used by someone who relies on a screen reader, the reality can look very different. That's where we start to see the gap between what we think works and what actually works, a gap between compliance and usability, and ultimately a gap between access and exclusion. And it's conversations like these that become especially important at this time of year with Global Accessibility Awareness Day today and with Canadian Accessibility Week coming up. There's a lot of focus on awareness, on progress, and on celebrating how far we have come. But it's also a moment to pause and reflect, to step back and think uh, not just what we have built, but does it actually work for the people we are building it for? Because accessibility, it's not just technical, it directly impacts independence, efficiency, confidence, and in many cases, whether someone can complete something at all. And that's exactly why today's discussion, it is grounded in real lived experience. We are talking about someone who has spent 15 years in outbound sales, made over 250,000 cold calls, and helped generate millions in pipeline. While navigating digital systems as a visually impaired professional, having lived with vision loss since age of 7. And today, as a global sales mentor, Martin MacArthur works with organizations to improve performance and drive international growth, where the accessibility of tools directly impacts outcomes. So today is really about understanding that reality, not from a checklist, but from actual experience. The session is recorded and it'll be shared with all of you after the webinar. With that, let's get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Aeisha Vyas, and I am Strategic Solution Architect at 4Point. I've been working with 4Point for more than 5 years and working closely with organizations that rely heavily on digital forms and complex workflows. A core part of my work is centered on accessibility, making sure the way people interact with forms actually work for different abilities, devices, and real world situations. I spend a lot of time helping teams understand how accessibility shows up in practice, specifically in forms that are already in use and already critical to business processes. Alongside that, my work also looks at how AI can be applied in practical ways to improve accessibility, whether that's making interaction more intuitive, reducing barriers for users, or helping teams identify and remediate issues faster. And what's particularly interesting to me is how AI can augment accessibility, not just make systems smarter, but making experiences more usable and inclusive in very real day-to-day scenarios. Outside of work, I am a big Agatha Christie fan, and I love how Poirot takes something very complicated, pieces it together, and finally, in a way that it finally makes sense, which is not too far off from how I feel about untangling forms, old forms, and complicated workflows associated with them. And I'm really glad you're here today, and I'm looking forward to walking through this conversation with you. For this one, Martin, I'll pass it on to you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Aeisha. As mentioned, my name is Martin MacArthur. I've spent the last 15 years in the outbound sales world as a sales development rep initially, and then moving onward to working with a few different outsourced outbound sales agencies, as well as launching my own during COVID, and then going back to another outbound agency and helping them generate pipeline and helping their clients do the same. In and as mentioned at the top, I am totally blind. At the age of 7, I was diagnosed with what's called juvenile retinitis pigmentosa, which ended up causing me to go totally blind. And obviously that presents numerous challenges, but with a very large support system, I've been able to navigate just life in general, but also sales and business as well. In August of last year, I made a pivot to a different industry, which is manufacturing, helping. I joined a company called Global Sales Mentor, which is a sales agency helping manufacturers that sell through, that sell internationally through distributors, and helping them put in place the systems and mechanisms to help their distributors perform a lot better in various international markets because there is a large gap from what is predictable and what is good to what is not. So that's what we do and how we help manufacturers, and I'm very fortunate to be a part of the conversation today.
So, thank you, Martin. Thank you for the introduction. All right. You're welcome to drop the questions in the chat, but we won't answer them during the webinar. We'll take the questions toward the very end. So here's how we'll spend our time today. We'll start with the guest perspective, just to ground this in real experience, not assumptions. And then we will move into accessibility challenges that show up most often and why they matter in day-to-day work. From there, we'll talk about where technology fails because of a lot of barriers are not obvious until you try to complete real tasks using real tools. And then we'll narrow in on forms and digital barriers, since forms are often where accessibility issues become make or break for users. After that, we'll touch on AI and what's changing, including where AI is genuinely helping today and where it still creates friction. And then we'll do an assistive tech reality check to level set what screen readers and other tools can do well, and where experience breaks down when design and structure are missing. All right, with that, let's begin the session. Martin, it is really great to have you with us today, and I'm really looking forward to learning more from your perspective. Before we get into tools and barriers, I think it's important to start with the person behind the experience, because everything we are going to talk about today is shaped by that. So let's start there. Can
For
you tell
sure.
us a bit about your professional journey, how you got into sales and then into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, um, how I guess how I got into sales was so I obviously with my blindness and the various challenges that accompany that, um, I went to college for business administration,
Mm-hmm.
and when I came out of that program, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do from there or where I wanted to go. But one thing that did always kind of interest me was sales and to some extent marketing. And I ended up finding an opportunity with a company that was looking for someone to make cold calls and call on prospects. And that didn't really require a whole lot of sight. As long as you could speak and pick up the phone, which I could do quite well.
Mm-hmm.
That seemed to work well. So I started with a very small company. It was, there's really no structure, no foundation there, and whatnot. So I gained a little bit of experience there for about a year, and then moved on to a managed IT service provider. Um, from there, kind of developed a lot more foundational building blocks in terms of
Mm-hmm.
how to execute outbound sales, how to have a conversation, how to just I guess refining and perfecting more and more
Nice.
than what I had. And then I worked with a couple of other companies along the way, and then um, I started. I think it was around maybe 2016, 17. I started to really dive into LinkedIn and social branding, personal branding, social networking.
Mm-hmm.
And I got really one of the things that I've been really good at is cultivating relationships and just sharing my story. Sorry, not telling, but sharing my story and just being a good resource and champion for people. So I ended up building a really strong connection on LinkedIn, network on
Yeah.
LinkedIn with people, and I ended up getting connected with a company out in San Francisco, and they're an outbound sales agency. So that was my first kind of taste or step into that world,
Mm-hmm.
the outbound agency world. Um, Unfortunately, they were ventured back, and the funding dried up. The company folded, and I was left to figure things out on my own. And I just started to create a lot of content, and it morphed into a business. Basically, it was just an idea I had brewing in the back of my mind for a long time, and it, 2020, it was time to you know figure out, is it just an idea? Is there something that will work? So I made the plunge and I launched a business and an outbound sales agency called the Outbound Sales Guy, which is a brand that I have on LinkedIn and
Mm-hmm.
have created very well. And I did that well for about 3 years, but um, during that period of time, I was also diagnosed with a severe kidney disease and was placed on dialysis for 4 years at home and ended
Wow.
up needing a kidney transplant 2 years ago. So I was, navigating a lot and, a lot of stress, a lot of exhaustion and medical
Really?
appointments, etc. And it just became too much. I wasn't giving enough focus and attention. Clients were leaving, etc. So I folded the business and ended up going to another agency once I could kind of get things back on track and I was with them for about 2 years and then unfortunately there was a pivot there with the
Mm-hmm.
business
Mm-hmm.
and that's what led me to Global Sales Mentor.
That's a really interesting story. Kudos to you for It's interesting how you figured out all and you've jumped all the hoops, but and it gives you a great context into how you got where you are right now. But what it doesn't always show is what that experience looks like in a day to day, especially in an environment that is fast paced, tool heavy, and performance driven.
Yeah,
So uh, I want to connect your journey to that reality, to that nuance.
yeah,
And you've built career in sales, which is often, again, tool heavy, fast paced, and performance driven. So, can
it
you
is.
talk a bit about how that has shaped your experience day to day, not just in terms of how you work, but also how you navigate systems, expectations, and pressure in that environment?
Great questions. So yes, with accessibility technology and just the you know traditional technology, day-to-day technology that is in sales, there's a very large gap there. I use a screen reader. It's called
Mm-hmm.
VoiceOver. It's built into the Mac operating system.
Mm-hmm.
So my Apple has been, I feel very strongly about this, that they've been at the forefront of accessible technology, no matter what the disability might be. And they came out a long time ago with a built-in screen reader on all their platforms. So that is what I use day to day.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and the way I navigate is I have to use the keyboard. So if I'm in an application, I have to tab an arrow key to where I want to be, and then use different commands on the keyboard to access different sections. Whereas a sighted person, they can just take their mouse and click on it, which
Mm-hmm.
probably is that task is probably completed within about a millisecond, where
Mm-hmm.
it could take me upwards to maybe 2 minutes to complete that task. So there's that factor. Um, in the sales environment, you have, especially in outbound sales, you have dialers that are third party. You have which is a third party software as a service. You have CRMs, you have
Mm-hmm.
sales engagements, and then there's Google, Microsoft, whoever your email is through. Um, and then you've got call analytics, conversational intelligence tool, intent tools, and then obviously, as everyone's experienced over the last probably year, but most recently, the seems like a fire hose experience right now is AI. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, to navigate all of those in a day-to-day environment, when I would say 90, maybe 95% of those tools are not built for people who, sorry, I shouldn't say people because I can only speak to my experience and my use case. So they're not built for someone that is totally blind using a screen reader and accessible technology. So in the day to day, when I've been with previous employers, I've had
Mm-hmm.
a couple of really good ones. And the company I'm working for now is one of them. But
Mm-hmm.
I've had to try and navigate these tools, and there hasn't always been the patience or grace or empathy
Right.
that is that should be expected. Maybe not expected, but that is required for someone that is navigating all these tools and using a screen reader.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They doesn't matter who you are, sales is still a performance driven environment. And if
Oh,
you're not
yes.
meeting those expectations and metrics, then there's probably going to be a very serious conversation taking place. So That has definitely been a challenge um, throughout. Obviously, when
Hmm.
I ran my own business, I dictated what I used and how I used it, and I also made it very clear to clients that I worked with that this is how it would, this is how I would be operating and why. Um,
Interesting.
but
Yeah.
I've also had to find different workarounds through various testing and um, different tools, try and find
Right.
different tools that would work. And so it has created a lot of friction. To some extent, it still creates a lot of friction. Um, but um, my personality is I do not give up. I do not take no as an answer. And I
Hmm.
always believe there is a way. You just have to work work a problem and uncover every aspect and try and figure out how you can solve that solution. So it might require a lot of time and frustration, patience, and in my case, a lot of swearing. But eventually, either do find a solution or
Hmm.
I move on.
Fair enough. Uh, and like what you mentioned about speed, it is so crucial. And this was actually my next question, that have you ever had to adapt how you use the tool because they weren't accessible, which you said you do that. How often does that happen?
Unfortunately, more than it should. Um, so when I was working with a company about maybe 10 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and they were a an agency,
Mm-hmm.
and they were using all these various tools that were not accessible. And I mentioned, I had a conversation with one of the company is owned by two people, and
Mm-hmm.
I had a conversation with the co-founder who's in charge of the technology side of it. And I said, hey, like this tool you want me to use every, in the day to day, but it's not accessible for me. And like I'm not going to be able to use it. So
Mm-hmm.
how, like what do you recommend? Like how can we come up with an idea or, how can we work around it? And kudos to him. He looped in the um, software that we were using, like the company, and took it as high as they could throughout the
Mm-hmm.
company because it was a large company. But unfortunately, the response basically from the development team was, well, it's a single use case, and we're
Oh,
not, basically was we're not going to change anything.
wow.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I have a large following on LinkedIn. I have a very loud voice on social, and that is now ever since then that company, they have changed hands since, but they're still around, and they're a company I will not do business with. I do not recommend them,
Mm-hmm.
because of that attitude of, well, it's you know one user, they can basically figure it out. So
Definitely, definitely.
unfortunately, it does happen, but there are consequences for those parties as well.
Right, right. Whether it's one of your employee or whether it's your customer,
Hmm.
I think if you do not accommodate, then it doesn't like it's a loss for both, right? It's loss for the company and then uh, for sure.
Yeah,
But
because that agency that I was working with, they just made the decision before they lost their funding to migrate away from that platform. So, that company ended up, the vendor ended up losing a lot of revenue because of, that the agency also provided their clients with that tool as well. So
Oh,
it had a, there was a compounding effect to that
I
response
see.
from the vendor.
Interesting. And
Yep,
for an employee such as you, it does affect the confidence. It does affect performance for sure, but the confidence
absolutely.
also.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
uh,
because if for me, especially in sales, I'm customer for lack of a better term, I'm customer facing. I'm talking to prospects all day long. If I don't have confidence that I'm able to do my job well and efficient and all that, then yeah, like I'm not going to be as confident in my delivery because I'm always anxious and concerned.
exactly,
Well, how am I going to access this section or that section?
exactly, exactly. So, what I'm hearing is that it's not just about the person's ability, it's also about whether the environment was designed to let them perform. And what you're describing isn't just personal, it's structural. So, let's talk about the technology layer and what day-to-day interaction looks like for you for the benefit of our audience here. Um, so, how has living with a visual impairment shaped the way you interact with technology day to day, particularly in a work environment? Not just in terms of the tools you use, but how you navigate systems, interpret information, and complete tasks under real world conditions.
So, like in work or in just
At work,
in
yeah,
general at work?
yeah.
Yeah. So, sorry, can you repeat that question?
Oh, sure, sure, sure. So, uh, how living with the visual impairment shaped the way you are interacting with like things that you do, particularly in work environment, and not just about the tools, but how you're navigating through the systems, how you are apart from the apart from the assistive technology tools, how do you interpret the information, complete tasks that are assigned to you at the work?
Gotcha. Yeah. So, um, for me, it's about repetition and about memory.
Okay.
So it's uh, if I'm using a specific tool, for example, I'll go back to the reference of a CRM because that's what a lot of people use on a daily basis. So if I'm using a CRM, I need to memorize in my head
Hmm.
the layout of that CRM,
Oh, wow.
which is challenging because
It keeps updating. So
it
how do
well
you,
it keeps
yeah.
updating, but also um like I was saying at the beginning was like for a sighted person they can on their on their screen they get the whole snapshot of what's on the screen, how it's laid out,
Hmm.
etc.
Hmm.
My screen reader tells me as I'm tabbing through, it tells me, and that's assuming that every button is labeled correctly, every drop down is labeled correctly, and for my screen reader. But the way that my screen reader navigates is not the same as a sighted person using a mouse. So
Hmm.
as I'm tabbing, it may say, for example, to access all the contacts, you as a sighted person, you might see it at the very top of the screen. And yet for me navigating with voiceover and tabbing through, it actually may show like read it as though it's at a totally different part of the screen.
Oh, so it's more like
If
if there's a proper structure to it or not, right? There's a proper tabbing
correct,
structure to it or not. right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that is challenging. Um and then knowing, okay, how far through the page do I need to tab? So can I do it quickly, or do I need to hear every spot that I'm tabbing through? Because obviously if I know roughly how many tabs to get to that section, that will help me increase and become a little more efficient. So a lot of what I do relies on repetition and memory.
Interesting, interesting. So, um, from your experience, are there any particular moments in, let's say, sales workflow where the tech breaks down the most in terms of accessibility?
Um, Breaks down. Yeah. I don't
Or-
know if it would be more that breaks down. It's just not. It's not adapted or
Okay.
created for my specific use case.
So, if there's any that one use case that you can highlight.
Yeah, for sure. So as I was saying, like in sales, a lot of sales reps use either a parallel dialer or power dialer,
Yeah.
if they're making a lot of high volume calls or strategic calls, what have you. Well, I've tested everyone on the market. I'm well connected with all of them, etc. And but the challenge for me specifically with my screen reader is that when you're using those tools, you load your list of contacts into the dialer and you hit
Mm-hmm.
go. Well, that will pop up a little window within the application. And in that window, it's got everything you need for the call. You know, the person's name, their title, their company, their, maybe some information from previous conversations. Now with AI, it'll pull in uh, research on the company, etc. Well, if I'm using one of those tools, one of those
Mm-hmm.
dialers, I cannot access it quick enough. So by the time that little
Interesting.
window pops up with all the information and the time it takes me to tab over to that window, that person's already hung up and it's moved on. So that it makes it very frustrating and challenging to be able to use that tool um, for someone who prospects virtually all day long and every day. So um, I have to create workarounds to access that,
Mm-hmm.
which ends up meaning I call, I make fewer calls throughout the day. The call volume is lower, and potentially, maybe I'm not getting as into as many conversations as I would if I were able to use one of those dialers. Um, so I would
Right.
say that that's the probably the biggest use case for me.
Okay, so that sounds like more like if the tools aren't up to par, then it leads to missed opportunities.
Yep.
And do you think that people realize how often visually impaired users must work around systems rather than with them?
To be honest, probably not,
Okay.
because like in the sales arena in that environment, it's a lot different than say in the consumer environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you only have I personally I'm the only one that I know of that is totally blind using accessible technology. I'm sure there's different degrees and
Mm-hmm.
case studies of different types of disabilities and accessible tech, etc. But I can only speak for me in my situation. So, um, it's not like, for example, say you know, Amazon, where okay, they've got maybe a million line users accessing their platform.
Mm-hmm.
Then
Mm-hmm.
they're probably gonna include accessible technology into the back end so that folks can navigate it. So it's a different environment.
Right, right. That's true. So with that, in perspective of work, let's say if you have to pick one daily tool that you use, and sorry, what one tool you would like to change instantly and why uh, at your workplace?
Uh, Good question.
Is it the dialer?
Yeah, it would probably be the dialer because like that's what I'm in. Like that is what would really impact my day to day and make me more efficient and increase my output per day. So yeah, it
Exactly.
would probably be that.
Okay. No, that's a good answer. So, uh, that's really interesting because tools inside the organizations are just one part of the equation. But, you know, for most users, the experience doesn't stop there. It's just when we are talking about accessibility, we are not just talking about work. We are users are constantly moving in between internal and external systems, like websites, like Amazon, you said, right, where a lot of key interactions happen, and in many those cases, like public facing experiences, are where accessibility gaps show up even more clearly. And I want to share that according to 2026 Web AIM Million report, about 95% of the top 1 million homepages, they still fail basic accessibility checks. And mind you, we are just talking about homepages. We are not even talking about the pages which lie under those pages. So, and when you think about that alongside the fact that roughly one in four adults, I'm talking about US, they live with a disability. That means a significant portion of an organization's existing customers are already trying to access those experiences. And so if the very first interaction, like such as homepage, has that kind of friction, it doesn't just create a bad moment. It sets a tone for everything that follows. And in many cases, people won't even care to go to the next step, right? So let's talk about that experience.
Yeah,
So,
I I would definitely agree with you. If I come to a site, especially in the business world, right?
mhm,
I used to be a decision maker, and to some extent, I still am for purchasing new technology. And the first two things that really determined for me if I was going to proceed with your product,
mhm,
one is how accessible was your website, right? For me
mhm,
to do my own research and navigate. And secondly, how accessible is your platform, and are you going to allow me to test it? Because if you're not going to allow me to test it, I don't care if it's a day trial, if it's 7, 14 a
right.
month, whatever. I don't care about that, but I want to be able to trial it. Because if it does not work for my screen reader in my use case, then I'm out
So,
and you lose a sale.
so what, from your experience, what are the biggest accessibility challenges you notice first when you land on a website?
The biggest would be, um, I think how the website is designed. So like, um, if they have, like you were saying, you go to the home page and then they have pages that are beneath that home
Mm-hmm,
page.
mm-hmm,
It was very difficult to access those secondary pages.
mm-hmm.
Say for example, they have a button to get to those next pages and they don't have that clearly labeled, then that's a very, very big issue for me. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to spend any more time on it. I'm out. So I'll be trying to find, is there another company that's comparable? If not, then I'll just figure something else out. So, because if it's going to cause a lot of friction just in the initial impression, then that tells me a lot about what the next steps are more than likely going to be.
Exactly. Yeah. And also,
And sorry, one other point to that as well.
yeah.
Um, if after kind of having that experience, I might sign up for a demo just to, because it could just be that they've had somebody design that site and maybe
Uh-huh.
didn't really give them a lot of guardrails or anything. So I
Interesting.
might
Yeah.
sign up for that for their demo. But if they get on their demo and maybe I tell them that I'm totally blind and use a screen reader, or they kind of figure it out because I'm very vocal about it and I talk a lot about it, so they're able to access that anywhere. But if they jump on the demo and they pop up a screen share and you'll start, you know, here's this and that, and can you see this and that? Well, that's definitely gonna that's not gonna be a very good outcome for you.
Right.
Because
Right.
I'm going to I can be a very difficult buyer. So I'm going to be very difficult, and the conversation's going to end, and I'm moving on. So
Makes sense. Yeah.
you got to know your audience, and you got to be able to adapt accordingly, especially when there's so much research available today on your prospect.
True. True. And I think the next thing I want to discuss is now that we talked about the broader websites, I want to narrow it down to forms because forms are where websites stop being informational and they become transactional, right? And
Mm-hmm.
when we talk about forms, we're not just talking about long application forms or onboarding journeys. Anytime you're capturing information from a user, whether it's opening an account, submitting a request, or even just as simple as entering an email address, it is a form. That is a data capture. And from users' perspective, those are all same experiences. So even if even the simplest interaction, like entering your email on a website, can either work or completely break down. So let's talk about that. And because from my understanding, forms are where the real friction shows up most frequently. So when you think about forms in general, like including paper-based forms, in-person processes, and digital ones, how has your experience been across those different formats, and where do you see the biggest challenge? Let's start with the paper forms, and then we can move on to the online form experience.
Yeah, so paper forms obviously don't work for me.
Right.
In some cases, they will, they might have a braille option, so that where they'll uh, have slots. So the uh, biggest time I've noticed this is come election voting time. So
Mm-hmm.
they'll have a braille sheet that they put over the voting card,
Mm-hmm.
and um, they have a slot for, it's a little box. I think or it might be a circle. I can't remember which, but anyhow, they have a little spot for you. It's just the width of a pen or whatever to be able to
Mm-hmm.
write, and then above it they have in braille what the question is. So that's very
Yeah.
helpful. But um, as I mentioned to you, I've been a part of the medical system for a
Mm-hmm.
long time. With my dialysis and kidney transplant, etc. And I'm sure you can probably appreciate there are a lot of forms that
Yeah.
you're provided throughout that process.
Right.
And
Are those like
the,
majority of them paper forms or like
the
some?
they're all paper,
Oh wow. Okay.
but They're all like they don't offer a braille version, so um, I would have to, you know, I obviously had somebody with me. I had my mom with me because it's a and well, both my parents with me,
Right.
but because it was such a major life altering event, so they're able to read me the information and fill up my answers and responses, etc. But if, for example, I didn't have anyone with me or could go with me,
Mm-hmm.
then how is that information, the the nurse or doctor or an administrative person would have to come in and read those questions to me and fill in my answers. So, um,
So do you think
that's
that
a challenge.
so do you think if those some of those forms or all of those forms, let's be positive, if all of those forms were online, so do you think that your experience would have been much better?
Absolutely. And for we're talking about a hospital, right? So it's a fairly large institution. They would have a large technology staff.
Hmm.
Um, and all their medical records are electronic. So they're, I would think they'd be able to digitize all that information and
Right.
get, so I access all my medical information through my chart, which is a part of the Epic system for medical records, etc. So I don't understand why, just put all the all the forms in there and I can access them on my iPhone, on my Mac,
Hmm.
and be able to fill them out, right?
Exactly. I hear you, but that's a very like one thing what you said about like digitize them, right? I get like for some templates, or for some companies, the idea of digitizing uh, be can scare them away because thinking that it's too huge. But I want to also like take this moment to, understand or talk to you about your experience with the AI, sorry, Darian. So, like, even in the cases you are using, even with the AI, which has to, depend on a fairly traditional model of fields, inputs, etc. And for many users who are relying on assistive technologies, the structure can still be limiting. But that's where we can use AI. And with advances in AI, interactions don't necessarily have to be just field based anymore, right? And the digitization can be rapid. They can quickly make their forms conversational, and they guide the user in more like a conversational way. So I what I would like to ask you is that we about Darien. So you've
Yep,
interacted with Darien. You interact that which is our conversational form,
yep,
or as we like to call voice form.
yep.
From your perspective, how different did that feel from uh, let's compare it with the online form, because I know the experience with a traditional page format form will be, huge. That's a huge difference. But let's
Yep.
talk about the closer contender. Let's talk about an online form versus voice-based form.
Yeah, for sure. So the other day, a company had reached out to me
Mm-hmm.
and they had sent me a form to, they sent me a link saying, can you fill this out and then we'll proceed throughout you know, to the next stage of our sales process, which quite honestly I thought was a bit stupid because of this, well, an enterprise type company. It was a small technology company, but what have you. So they sent me the link and it
Mm-hmm.
took me to a form. Okay, fine. Uh, this my screen reader. It, I'm trying to think. kind of like the way I processed it anyways in my mind was it had like a landing page, saying, the company name, this is a form for X, Y, and Z product. And then I think there's a couple other pieces of information, then proceed. So once I hit proceed, it took me to the actual questions in the fields to fill out that form. And I've come across this numerous times when it comes to filling out a form, is that it will seem to read like the question, but then if there are options to that question below, or if there's fields to fill in below, it won't read that information. It won't read, okay, first name, last name. It'll just give a box. So then I've got to try and figure out what.
No labels, basically.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
So then I got to spend time to try and figure out what that field is and what I'm supposed to put in there. And so I end up getting the form filled out and I sent it off, but I didn't proceed because it was just ended up being a lot of time wasted and friction, etc. So but after my kidney transplant at the hospital, they also sent me a survey, which was a form, and they had a lot of, again, theirs was like check boxes, I think.
Okay.
So you select the checkbox that fits your response. But again, they had like, so the right way my screen reader read it, I don't know if it's how it was laid out, but they had the question, and then they had like 10 different options below the question, and then all the checkboxes. So I would have to go back through and be, okay, well, what was this checkbox supposed to be associated with?
Right.
So it was just challenging to complete.
Right. And imagine if we can just do it through voice, through a conversation, that would be a game
Exactly.
changing. Yeah.
So with Darian, it's called Darian, right?
Yes, Darian.
Yeah. So with Darian, I just say Martin MacArthur. My email is this. My address is this. Job title, company, all that, and bing, bang, boom, it's done. And
Wow.
what's really cool is like I use text to speech all the time. I use Siri, I use Gemini, I
Right.
use the dictation feature in Perplexity and different AIs that I'm using day to day. And for me, voice is just so much easier. I can just tell it and move on, and I don't have to try and navigate a screen. So
Yeah, I agree.
yeah, like what I would think if an organization is kind of debating whether they should digitize their forms or not, um, I, my opinion, it's a no-brainer, especially when you can have the power of AI to support it.
Exactly. And I'm curious to see how, it continues to grow. But what's important to recognize is that a lot of these newer experiences are still built on top of something foundational, that is the assistive technologies. While most people have heard of them, whether they are screen readers, voice tools, or other accessibility features, very few of us understand how they work, right? Or what really it looks like to navigate systems using them day-to-day life. So I think it's also important us to spend a few minutes to talk about the assistive technologies. So what assistive technologies do you rely on the most when you are navigating digital system? I think you answered this for me already. It's voiceover, but uh, is there any other that you would like to highlight?
No.
Fair enough.
No,
So,
the only one that I use and that works and is voiceover. Like I said, it's built into the Mac OS ecosystem. I am a fluent Braille reader, so Braille
Mm-hmm.
works, but that
Mm-hmm.
is not. I don't read it as often or as frequently because of technology and the advancements.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, however, in the past, long time ago, I would say probably 20 years ago, I used a tool. It was before the SaaS evolution, but I used a
Mm-hmm.
tool called Windowize, which was a product. I forget if it was a collaboration with Microsoft or if they just built it to
Window
support my,
eyes.
yeah, window
Okay.
and then hyphen eyes.
Okay.
But it was a CD. So if anyone knows what the hell that is, good luck. But you put it in and you load it on your system, and it was a screen reader,
Right.
but it was for the Microsoft environment,
Okay.
and um, Microsoft. I'll be very careful because I don't want to offend anyone that is a Microsoft user, but
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion, as a blind user, Microsoft has a accessible screen reader ish
Mm-hmm.
called Narrator.
Okay.
It is nowhere near the as sophisticated or have the capability that VoiceOver does.
Okay. Okay.
I've used it several times. I've played with it. I broke it.
Okay.
um, so,
That's good. There.
but but
Yeah.
but back 20 years ago, Windows was a great screen reader for the Microsoft environment, and it worked well for me at that time. I've also
Right.
used JAWS for Windows, which is I'm pretty sure now they're they are a software as a service application, so
Okay.
you can use it in the current environment. Windows, I'm pretty sure is obsolete just because they didn't transition to a SaaS model.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so I've used JAWS for Windows way back when, but I do know that a lot of people use their technology today.
Mm-hmm.
Another one I used, but it was really difficult because it's a more of a magnification tool, and it's called Zoom Text. And I do not know if they're still around or not. So those are the ones that I'm familiar with and
From
I've used.
yeah, from what I'm hearing is that it's slowly evolving. It's slowly getting there. And
Oh, so sorry.
awareness today's
One other one that I know a lot of people use is called it's Narrator, I believe it's
narrator.
called.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
that's good to know. So the landscape is evolving, and I think the awareness is far higher than it was years ago.
Yep.
But for someone who's making decisions, whether that's selecting tool or shaping digital experiences, uh, what should they actually do differently? So let's say, what should leaders specifically be thinking about when they are choosing a digital tool? What do you have to say about that?
Um, I would say that you need to understand who your audience is.
Mm-hmm.
What makes up your audience? Are they primarily blind users? Are they low vision users because there's a significant difference?
Mm-hmm.
Are they do they have cognitive challenges? Do they have uh, physical mobility issues? Like do do they have issues with the maybe moving their head with to navigate the screens, or maybe they have a challenge with their hands and they're not able to use the keyboard or mouse. So I would strongly recommend understand who your audience is going to be and are,
Mhm.
and then do your very best to, because look, I know that it costs money to develop variations of applications. I'm not
Right.
naive to that. However, if you are a large organization and you are going to target or reach out to a large volume of users, then it needs to be, it can't just be usable for one, it needs to be usable for
For a
all.
fraction of, exactly. I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
yeah.
Well, we've reached top of the hour, but Martin, thank you. This was very powerful, practical, and really insightful. I'm sure everyone who joined today is walking away with at least one perspective that challenged how they think about accessibility or how their own digital experiences actually perform in real world. And I think what stands out most from this conversation that accessibility is just not about guidelines or compliance. It's about whether someone can actually complete a task, right? So thank you, and I really appreciate you for sharing your experience so openly, and to everyone who joined. Thank you for spending the hour with us. And if you would like to continue the conversation, please feel free to reach out to us. And hopefully, what you've heard today encourages you to step back, reflect, and keep pushing towards experiences that people can actually complete. Before I let you go, there's just one thing I want to go through. If you are someone who is looking for, how to get started with accessibility, or you have multiple questions and you're like, if this all makes sense, but what do we actually do, or from where do we actually begin? So this is the simplest way to start. We offer 1.5 hour custom working session where we can focus specifically on your organization. We look at your current state and we align on accessibility standards that apply to you. And we walk away with clear, high level next step recommendations. And this isn't about just jumping into remediation right off the bat, but it's about getting clarity, reducing uncertainty. So if you would like to learn more, kindly visit our website. And with that, I thank you for joining us today. And since I want to we are already past our time. I want to respect everyone's time, and for all the questions, we'll reach out back to you with the answers. Thank you for the questions in the chat, and thank you for your time today. And thank you, Martin. Thank you for giving us, sharing the stage with us. Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.
For sure.